All right, cool. Thanks all of you for coming. So today's topic is basically sharing code between web and mobile apps. So I'm pretty sure most of you know already about Angular. How many of you know about NativeScript? Who knows what's NativeScript? Perfect. There's still a few of you that don't. So I'll give you a quick definition in a second. So like Offer said, I'm Sebastian Witalec, and if any of you is on Twitter, you can follow me. I'm Seba Vita. But today is not about me, it's about you trying to learn something new. So first of all, for those of you that don't know about NativeScript, it's basically an open source framework for building mobile applications. You can use JavaScript, you can use Angular, you can use Vue, and then you get native UI, native performance for iOS and Android. That's pretty much it in a nutshell, okay? So today's goal, and since we have World Cup, today's goal is basically this scenario where we want to be able to build for Android, for iOS, and the web from the same project, right? So the idea is that we have one project and two docs, right? Or mobile applications or web applications, right? That's the idea. So how are we going to do that? So basically, it's the marriage between NativeScript and Angular that enables us to do it. NativeScript will give us iOS and Android, while Angular is going to give us JavaScript or the web part of it, but also the architecture that enables us to do all the code sharing, right? I had a whole ton of slides for that, but I really simplified it. The core concept here is like this. We have this, let's say, player component or some sort of component class. And then in there you have a name, you have a Twitter handle, like a couple of properties. You also have a function that says hello, and I can't pronounce it, but some of you probably can. But you can pass in like the attribute and you will do something, right? And then the idea is later that we'll have a template for the web application, right? And we can bind to the name property, to the Twitter property, and then on click event, we can call say hello web, right? And then automatically we can do the same thing with NativeScript, except we have our own set of templates for the UI. So in this case, I'll have a label that binds to the name and the Twitter, and also on tap event, my button is going to say call say hello and pass in the mobile property. And this is pretty much the idea. Like we can reuse all of that TypeScript code that is behind, like all the business logic that's there. And then one of the other important pieces in Angular that's helping us is dependency injection. So we have a scenario where we want to make an HTTP call. And the thing is that as much we calling the same HTTP services, the actual interface that of an AJAX call or what happens on iOS Android, they're completely different, right? So if I want to use like a HttpClient module for Angular, for the web, it's not going to work on NativeScript, right? So dependency injection comes in really handy in this scenario. So in the web application, we're going to do this, right? We're going to import HttpClient module and add it to our ng module, right? For NativeScript, we basically have an equivalent for it. So we use dependency injection for that. We import NativeScript HttpClient module and then inject it into NativeScript's ng module for that. And then automatically later on, if we have some sort of service, so my HTTP service, we're going to use the HTTP client, which is generic. And then in this case, add it in the constructor, and then we can call get data, and using that HTTP client, we can make the same call. And if I run this code on a mobile application, then it's going to make it the NativeScript way, right? If I run it on a web application, the ng module will give us an AJAX call or whatever Angular wants. Okay, so that's pretty much the core idea. So let's get more down into code sharing, or more like a project structure, or what we're trying to do in theory. So the idea is like there's a couple of different ways of doing it, but today I want to talk about the monorepo way. So the idea is like we have this one big project, and we have like all our navigation or directives, services, pipes, like they all sit in one place. And we have, for example, the SAS variables that they can be shared. So if you have theming for your application in general, like across the app, you could have the same. But then we would have a different CSS style sheet for web and different for NativeScript, because we have slightly different properties. For each of the components, we can reuse the TypeScript class, but then we'll have two separate HTML files for defining what goes in the UI. And then finally, for each modules, we can actually share all the components, we can share all the navigation, but we would have 2 ng modules inside that module. So for example, in a web application, you could use the Angular materials, while in NativeScript, maybe you could use the NativeScript Pro components or something like that. So they don't clash with each other. So once we have this whole project, then we need some sort of build process that if you want to build a web application, you will ignore the NativeScript files and then give you a web application, or it would ignore the web files and then it will give you a NativeScript app. That's kind of like where we're heading for. And then to do code splitting, we also need some sort of convention to make it possible. So if you have a component which has like name component.ts and then component.html, if you want to make it code shareable, what we need to do is treat the default one as the web file, and then if we add .tns.html, this automatically becomes a NativeScript file, so that later on the build process knows which one to pick. We want to add some style sheets, we do the same thing. So we have like a web file, which is just .sas, and then for NativeScript we can have .tns.sas. And that's how you can actually split the 2 files and tell the builders what to do. So how do we put that in practice? Like, how can you actually get structure the project like this? So like Rob was actually telling us before, there's ng-add, which is like a brand new thing that came into Angular CLI, so we could use this. So I've created a NativeScript schematics. So if you install that using npm, then later on you could, for example, create a new project. So if you call ng-new and then provide add NativeScript/schematics as the collection, and then you can give it a name and you add the -- shared flag, and this will automatically generate a project for you that is in the code sharing structure, which is pretty cool. And the way this works is you have this shared project and you want to build the application. So for building a web application, just call ng-serve, and it's like business as usual. This will just go to Angular CLI and then build your web app. To build a mobile application, you have to call, and in this case, we're still using NativeScript CLI, so TNS is for the NativeScript CLI. So you would call TNS run iOS -- bundle or Android -- bundle, and then this will kind of like work in like double steps. So the first step is we actually running Webpack. So Webpack is clever enough to see, it's like, oh, there is a TNS file, so let me ignore the web file here. And then in memory, it will recreate a NativeScript project structure, and then pass it on as the next step to the NativeScript builder, and then which will give you like an Android or iOS app. And then, so to visualize this is very important that you know what's going on. I have this example. So the tiger is the NativeScript build process, okay? The duck are the web files. So when the NativeScript build happens, we don't want the tiger to get the duck, right? So that's when Webpack comes in, right? And it helps us. So I'm just gonna go quiet for 20 seconds and you'll see what happens. So basically, this is it. No sound. Right? So this is how our build works. It's like the duck dives in, it's like, choom, ninja. Right, and it's like, just deal with it. Yo. So I've got a small demo, so I built a small application that is already like structured, and I want to show you a little bit around it. So hopefully this will envisage, like show you more as to what we're looking at. So one of the first things, like I created this service for this thing called Pet Finder. It works in the US that allows you to search for pets for adoption. So you want to adopt a dog, or you want to adopt a crazy ninja duck, or a hamster. You can use that API for it. So you can install it. It's just called Angular Pet Finder, and you can add it to your project. It's pretty cool for demos. But one of the first things is that this service uses HttpClient. Okay. So in my application, so this was in my npm modules. In my application, I have my app module. So for the web side of the project, you see I'm using HttpClient over here. And then I have also in here app module.tns.ts. And then in this case, I'm using NativeScript HttpClient. And then I'm adding to the import. So this is basically the trick. It's like, okay, we want to do HTTP, we can just pass one or the other. Same thing as we were talking before. I also have like a user service. So I just want to, like, there's a whole bunch of different things going on in this project, but like user service is like one of the best ones to show you how it works. So the user service will have a sign-in function or register or reset password. So a sign-in will use our backend called Kinvi. So I could just, for example, say, okay, first make sure you're logged out, then call login, pass in the username and password, and then if everything goes right, you know, navigate to another page. And then we have like a register function. So, and you see, I just have one user service here, right? There's no other one. So this user service is shared all across. And the user service like has like, you know, 170 lines of code, which I had to write just once and test only once. And then next thing is, like, let's say if I go to a login component. So see, the login component will, I'm going to use, again, dependency injection to get our user service. And then I can expose our login function or the register function. So again, it's just one class for the login component. But then I just have two HTML files. So one HTML file that will have a couple of buttons. So I have one button, for example, that we'll call the login function, and then another button that, for example, we'll call the register function, or I have it multiple times. All right? So I on click, just calling register, passing the validation. And then for NativeScript, it's basically a very similar idea. Like I also like have my text fields to capture the input, but in this case, again, like I have a button that on tap event will basically either call login or register. So it's really the only place where we have differences is either inside ng modules when we provide different things, and then when we define what goes into the UI. So if I build this application, I'm not going to walk you through the whole of the app because that would be too much. I can just do tns run ios --bundle, run this. Did I do -o? I'm going to let it run quickly. And let's see what sort of animals we can adopt in the US. So we have a very basic login screen. Using material design. This is as pretty as it gets when I build web applications. Don't judge. Wi-Fi, come on, show me the data. There you go. So these are the pets that I already added to favorites. So we can go maybe see if we can adopt Folsom. He's an absolute darling. This little guy is sweet and as sweet as can be. He's been through a lot of changes lately. I mean, oh, who wants to adopt Folsom? Right? And we can also go and like look for pets. So this only works in the US for now. So I could search in Boston, and we could look for some barnyard animals. So if you want to open a farm, it's like, hey, Buster. Let's take Buster, baby cakes, and Phoebe. Like, yeah, I love Friends, so let's take Phoebe. And then I can go back to my homepage, and it's like all these guys are going to be here. So if I go now to the NativeScript app, it's a very similar flow, but I actually decided that I want to have slightly different navigation. So I didn't want to have like a navigation bar across the whole app. I just want to have like start with a login screen, log in, and then just be able to have a list view with all my animals. So you see Folsom still here. You have Leah. We have Buster. So you can go and check out information. He's 6-year-old, 90 pounds, neutered, so he's not going to cause any troubles with other males, you know, not going to fight. And he's ready for Christmas, so there we are. We can also search for other animals. So we can look for some horses. And we have this theory that horses in Israel, they strengthen the Wi-Fi. It's a solid theory. We tested it in the desert yesterday. And then, yeah, so I added Gracie and Paps, and maybe Milo. Milo looks okay. So if I reload this page very quickly, we should be, somehow, it didn't seem to have added it. Might be just delay on the network. There you go. We got Milo, we got Gracie and Paps. And this is the really cool thing, because like these both applications use the same APIs underneath, you know, using the same backend, and everything just works pretty much from the same code. And that's like the whole idea in a nutshell. And also, like, so this demo, like if you're curious about the code, you can just find it on my GitHub. So it's just like GitHub at sebavita/petfinder, sorry, petbrowse-lite. So you can look it up later. Let me get back to the slides, because I got some more to tell you about. So also sometimes there's a different bunch of challenges when you're building code sharing projects. I just want to highlight one of them, and that's basically when we have the mismatch between the APIs of different libraries. So if you have one library to do something on web and then the same one in NativeScript, for example, they will be both written in JavaScript, but the authors might decide on completely different APIs or completely different ways of doing it. So the first time I built the PetBrowse application, I was using Firebase in there, and the API in the NativeScript Firebase plugin was completely different to the one in the Angular one for web, because the NativeScript Firebase one was based on the native iOS and native Android SDKs. So the Angular one was using promises, sorry, it was using observables, while the NativeScript one was based like on just promises or just basic listeners. And so architecturally, they were completely different. So how you can overcome those things is there's a couple of approaches I could see. So if this is our like service in the cloud with two different plugins, we could create an abstraction, but on top of the services. So what we could do is just have our backend.service.ts and backend.service.tns.ts, right? And then we could basically implement the same business logic twice and just call our maybe login function, maybe a couple of other things. And then if we do that, we could write those services so that they expose the same interface. So that later on our components where we use dependency injection to get our data service will have exactly the same functions. That's kind of like one way, right? So, and this approach is usually good when your library has like 100 different functions, but you're only using one or two, so you just create a very small wrapper. Another approach, which I used for my previous version of that demo, was to have an abstraction on top of the plugin. So in this case, we're building a plugin wrapper. So for every function and every type, we basically create a common interface, and for all the functions and all the types, and we make sure that those wrappers expose all that functionality to that common interface. So that later on, our data service is just one. It talks to the wrapper, and then can do something in the components. So that's kind of one of the ways. Next topic, project migration. So it's fair enough that I showed you that you can call ng-new, and then you can create a shared project. And that allows you to, like, out of the box, have a code sharing project. But what about your app that you've already been building for the last 6 months or 2 years, right? How about turning this into a code sharing, right? It's like, uh-oh, panic, right? That's the usual thing. So given we have schematics nowadays, I was like, hey, how about I can help you automate that? So I created a schematic where if you have this project, like a web project you created with ng-new, what you could do is call ng@@NativeScript /schematics, and then this will run like a mobile @schematics, so it's like a conversion schematic, and you turn your web project into a code sharing project. So that later on you can call ngserve or just tns run iOS or Android -- bundle like I was doing before. And like this works, like it takes a couple of minutes for it to happen. And so one important thing to remember is that this doesn't convert all your components or your modules, it just restructures your project, right? So that your project is in a format that is ready for code sharing. There's another one, if you have already a NativeScript project, you could actually call ngg-add-web. This is still in progress, it's not 100% finished, but it basically does the reverse. So in this case, I can call ngserve and tns run -- bundle, and it will still kind of work. I kind of expect it to be finished in a couple of weeks. So I said, okay, so these schematics, will do the conversion of the projects. Then we have to go and convert all of our components or our modules. And we usually do them like module by module, like step by step, rather than convert everything one go. So if we have a home component, what I propose you could do, and that's already working, you could call ngg migrate component, and then you can do -- name and then provide the component's name. And then the schematic will go find the component, and then you do the transition. So if you find any HTML files or SAS files or CSS, you do the split, so you add the .tns file. And these .tns files, they won't really have any meaningful content. You would just have like something saying like, hey, yeah, this is the migrated component, now add your HTML here. Like, I'm kind of trying to come up with ideas that we could maybe do the transformation of the web HTML, but it's pretty complex, so we're gonna get there. Give us some time. So that's how we convert individual components. We could also convert modules. So if you have a module that has multiple components inside and it has like navigation, etc., again, you could call ngg migrate module, give it a name. So in this case, it will be menu. And then the first step that we'll do is migrate all the components. So using the previous schematic, right? Code reusability. And then after that, we'll like copy some of the files and then split our ng modules. And in this case, actually, this ng module for NativeScript will already have pieces that are required for NativeScript to work. And then we also, like, if looking at things like, if this one has HTTPClient module, then we're gonna add NativeScript HTTPClient module. So we're trying to do some of the conversions already for you, which is pretty cool. So I think this pretty much deserves a good fist bump. Right? It's pretty awesome. I think my schematic is still cooler than this cut. So just to recap, migration, we're looking at 3 different commands that can help your life. ng-add with add NativeScript /schematics, ngg for migrate component, and then ngg for migrate module. And then this will pretty much help you do the trick for the code migration. And this works, it's already out there, and I had some people tweeting at me saying like, hey, this worked, like it took me an hour to convert like my project, etc. So it's pretty awesome. So it wouldn't be me if I didn't make a reference to your winner of Eurovision. I was still disappointed it wasn't somebody from Australia, because that would be even further up. That would be cool. So demo time. So I just want to show you in practice how the schematic itself works. So it's not going to be diving too deep into the project. But I have a small project that has like a basic service, but it's just a web app. I could possibly just run it and then see what happens. And then in this application, we just have like a service that allows me to like look for cinemas that are in the UK. It's like a real-time service, so I can go like, hey, there's a picture house, and then it kind of shows you what films they're playing, so we can go and watch the film. So I kind of want to convert this project into a NativeScript project, right? So let's see what we can do. So I can do ng-add NativeScript /schematics, and then just run that. So pretty much the first steps, what it does is just like does all the changes to the project. So we could have, yeah, you add like all the modules and all the required files. So you can see they already started appearing in green. So we've added NativeScript app module. So this one will have this like Barcelona module, which is just a demo module for you to have a look how to structure your module if you want to. We've also added a NativeScript app component, so that you can actually use NativeScript page router outlet. And then basically from here, you can go and start making changes to your project. So while this is running in background, I'm not really gonna run this project, but I can, for example, from here call something like ng-generate migrate component, and then it will be -- name, and we have this home component here that doesn't really have much, like it has a TypeScript class, it's got HTML, so I will say -- name home, And then you can see the schematic created a new file, which is this one. So it just has like, hey, homeworks, this is a migrated component. Also, it made a couple of other updates. So it went to the app module and then added the home component, but to the NativeScript TNS, because it already was in the web one. So that's how we can do it. We also have this other module, which is called Cinema module. So Cinema module will have like Cinema list and listing components. So I can, for example, try to migrate this. So let's migrate module. And then in this case, it's called Cinema. And then you could see, create a whole bunch of files. So it added a .tns file for both of our components. It also made like a slight modification to the component itself, because for NativeScript we have to use module ID, because that's how we can identify each of the individual components. And then it updated, like it created NativeScript's ng module. So it automatically brings in NativeScript common module, the forms module, the router, but also adds our components that we just migrated. And then from this point, it's just basically tying up the loose ends. So say, hey, let's just update the routing and then run the application, and we're pretty much ready to go. So I'm not going to build the application because that's going to take a couple of minutes. I'm pretty much out of time. So the last funny video. Thank you for listening, and have a good day.